Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to Alta Live. My name is Beth Spotswood. I am Alta's digital editor, and I am very excited and honored to welcome you to today's conversation on Kelseyville, California, and the potential renaming of it. Lydia Lee wrote a newsletter about this issue for Alta's newsletter. And so what we're going to do today is expand upon that and kind of what happened in Kelseyville, why it's named Kelseyville, and the movement afoot to change that name. About our guests today, Lydia Lee writes frequently about design and architecture in the San Francisco Bay Area. And she is the author of the forthcoming book, The Well-Designed Accessory Dwelling Unit, Fitting Great Architecture into Small Spaces. Today, she is joined by Dr. John Parker, who holds a PhD in archaeology, a master's in anthropology, and has been a registered professional archaeologist and historian since 1985. He began conducting archaeological research in Lake County in 1971 and has conducted hundreds of archaeological surveys and mitigation projects throughout the county. So we're going to speak with both of them today about Kelseyville, what happened there, why it's significant, and the kind of project to change the name that is currently afoot. Before we dive into that, Alta Journal, if you're unfamiliar, is an award-winning magazine and website focused on California and the West. We are a big, beautiful magazine like this. We come out quarterly. You can subscribe to Alta, get gorgeous issues, access to all of our digital content, including our archives, California Book Club baseball cap, and a bookstore guide to indie bookstores of California and the West, all for $50 a year. I hope you will consider supporting us. You can also join as a digital member for $3 a month. For free for everyone, we have weekly events like this, Alta Live every Wednesday at 12:30. California Book Club, third Thursday of the month. In fact, this month we're focusing on poet Gary Snyder. I'm sure many of you are familiar with his work. And so consider checking out Alta. This interview will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later this afternoon. We are going to send you links to Lydia's article on Kelseyville, Dr. John Parker's work in anthropology and archaeology around Lake County, anything else that pops up. That there's a group called, I have it open, in fact, Citizens for Healing. They are behind this name change process for Kelseyville. We'll send you a link to that as well if you're interested in communicating with them. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask questions of our guests. There is also a chat. Please let us know where you are zooming in from. It's nice to see where our community of folks zooms in from. I am in Novato, California. Let's start with you. Lydia, where are you today?
I'm in Menlo Park on the peninsula.
And John, where are you?
I live on the north slope of Mount Konocti. It's a volcano right on the shores of Clear Lake. My address is Kelseyville, California.
Got it. John, I'd like to start with you. And let's start kind of as early as we can. Can you tell us about this now known as Kelseyville, where you live, this region, why it is so significant? I mean, obviously all land is significant to various people, but you happen to live in a particularly historically significant area for Indigenous people. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, actually this Clear Lake in Lake County is the oldest lake in the Americas. Okay. That's it. I mean, this lake has been here at least 500,000 years, and there has been lakes and marshes in this location for 2 million years. So the very first people in the New World would have set up shop around Clear Lake. That's one of the reasons why I do archaeology here, is because of that time depth. We have artifacts around this lake that date back 20,000 years, chipped obsidian tools. We have the oldest spear points in North America, 14,500 years old. And the people that are living here now today moved into the region 14,500 years ago, and they've been living around this lake ever since. I don't know any other place in the world where one community of people or tribes of people have lived in one spot for that long, that amount of time. It's just amazing.
And yet where you live right now is named for Andrew Kelsey, who lived in the region, if I'm not mistaken, for 2 years.
Right. Yeah.
Why is it named after him?
It's I don't have a clue, actually. It used to be, it had a couple other names. It was called Uncle Sam for a while, because the volcano that I'm living on, Mount Konocti, used to be called Uncle Sam Mountain. Was Kelsey Town for a while. You know, I don't know. It's one of those mysteries of history.
I'd read something that technically Andrew Kelsey was the first person who had built an adobe structure in the region, and perhaps that's how you kind of got dibs on land.
It's possible. I know. Oh, what is it? The Spanish. Oh, what's his name? Built a log home. He had a log cabin in that general area and some corrals for cattle. Salvador Vallejo claimed this area during the Spanish period and ran cattle here. His Spanish land grant claim was never formalized. The paperwork that lists it conveniently had the signature line ripped off of it, so nobody knows if it was actually legitimate. But that was the first building that we know here, a log home back in the 1840s, 1830s, 1840s.
Lydia, I'm going to get to you in a minute, but first I want to find out, one quote in Lydia's article, which made a big impact on me, was a resident saying that living in Kelseyville was akin to living in Hitlerville. That Andrew Kelsey was just so evil, so awful to the indigenous people of the region, that naming this community after him was abhorrent. Can you tell me, John, what Kelsey did, and I believe his business partner Stone
Right.
was involved in this as well, but what they did that was so particularly horrible to the indigenous community that was living
Well,
there?
Charles Stone and Andy Kelsey basically bought the remaining cattle from Salvador Vallejo and the rights to graze cattle in this area. The Native Americans here locally believed that when Salvador Vallejo moved his cattle out of here, the rest of the remaining ones belonged to them, the Native Americans. Kelsey and his brother were bad before they got to California. I mean, they were squatters on land in Missouri and trying to, get preemptive rights to that land. They were kicked out of one town in Missouri and moved upstream and did the same thing again. They came across to California, ended up purchasing this right to these cattle from Salvador Vallejo, and immediately figured that the Native Americans here were their slaves. That's kind of how they saw them. They offered beef to the Native American community, and the Native American community moved closer to their settlement here, their adobe. They actually forced the Indians to build the adobe for them. And then once they befriended the Native Americans and told them, you don't have to go hunting anymore because we have cattle, why don't you just turn in all your bows and arrows? So the Native Americans did that, and they were on friendly terms until they did that. And then stuff began to happen. Kelsey took the chief's wife, a 15-year-old girl by the name of Upi, and one of her friends to live with he and Charles Stone. And they enjoyed taking young girls from the tribe whenever they wanted to. And if a mother would not allow them to do it, they would would punish the mother. They would hang her up by her thumbs, you know, for a week at a time or whatever. That was kind of the start of things. Then they decided that then the gold rush happened. They decided, oh, well, let's go up and get some gold. So they rounded up a bunch of Native Americans from the area, took them up to the gold country and put them to work digging gold for them. And they came back with a, you know, an armload of gold. And that worked out pretty good. So the next year they decided to do it again. And this time they had Governor Boggs kind of fronted the money for their trip, and they took 100 Native Americans. They went up to the Sierras, and they decided they could make more money selling their supplies than digging for gold. So they sold all their supplies and came home, leaving the Native Americans in the Sierras, surrounded by tribes that were their enemies. Out of the 100 Native Americans that they took, only 2 returned to Clear Lake alive. And that got the village here a little bit disturbed. Each Indian that here living around them would get 4 cups of flour a day as a ration, and that was it. If you asked for more, you were punished. One of the Native Americans who was responsible for guarding the watermelon patch, apparently a raccoon got in and messed with the watermelon patch. He was shot. Visitors to the Kelsey Ranch report in their diaries that they would have Native Americans come out and they would shoot at them at the ground just to make them dance as an entertainment. And that was a pretty typical weekly entertainment at the Kelsey Ranch. So it's, you know, this sort of thing went on for the 2 years that they were here. And it finally, you know, broke the back of the tribe. And the tribe decided, you know what, we can't handle these guys anymore. You got to take care of it. The last straw, I think, was they were so hungry they decided to go out and get one of the cattle. And so they took one of the horses to go get the cattle. The horse managed to get away and take off. And so they knew that they were in big trouble. The Native Americans did. So that's when they decided to put together a plan to take care of Stone and Kelsey. So it's, yeah, it was.
By take care of, you mean kill.
Right. Yeah.
Which they did.
Which they did. Right. And there are 5 different variations of the story. I was trying to find out what actually happened. Well, there are no eyewitnesses left. And the eyewitnesses that were there couldn't write or had biases that were so outrageous, it's ridiculous. I mean, you know, I use the word history. I break it into 2 words: his story. History is not what really happened. History is someone's version of what happened based on their own biases and how they see it. If you and I were to go to a fireworks show and later on describe it, we'd have totally different descriptions of the same fireworks show because it's our history, our version, our story of what happened, you know.
Yeah.
That's why I got into archaeology, because in archaeology, the stuff in the ground doesn't lie. You know, you can tell me you only drink 5 beers a week, and if I find a 12-pack in your garbage can, I know that that's a lie. So,
Lydia, when did you learn about the kind of activism afoot to change the name of Kelseyville? Why did you decide to learn more about Kelseyville and the plan, the goal at least, by some citizens to change the name?
Yeah, well, I have friends who live in the area, and I think I was doing a day trip there to do, just sort of explore the area a little bit while I was in town. And I remember looking up, just kind of Googling and seeing like, oh, what is this area about? And I found this place called Bloody Island, which is related to the whole Kelseyville story in a very sad way, because it it made me, as I did more research in it, and maybe John can speak to that as well, because he is the historian here, but just how, like how the odds were stacked against the native population here. Like, even if they had nothing to do with the killing of Kelsey and Stone, like the people of the whole area suffered incredibly as a result. And that's not even to say, you know, how Kelsey and Stone were, you know, their murders seem to be incredibly justified based on what they were doing to the tribe. And so John, do you want to talk about a little bit of Bloody Island? Because that's kind of an interesting.
Yeah. Once Stone and Kelsey were murdered, the government decided to send the military up here to make an example of the Native Americans. And but of course, as soon as the military came over Mount St. Helena into this area, word went out to all the tribes. And by the time the military got to Clear Lake, there was no one to be found. Everybody was in hiding. That the only place that there was anyone was an island up at the north end of the lake, far away from Kelseyville. And those people, although they spoke the same language, were not really part of the tribe that lived in Kelseyville. And but they were the only ones that the military could find. So they decided, okay, let's make these guys the example. And they couldn't attack the island from the shore because their rifles wouldn't shoot far enough. So they sent back to what was it? Benicia was the capital at that time. They sent back to Benicia and had them bring up a howitzer on a wagon over the mountain. A howitzer, a cannon.
Oh,
right. And two of them actually, and they had boats on these wagons that they had to bring over, you know, horse-drawn wagons. They had to bring boats and two cannons over the Mount St. Helena into Clear Lake, and they loaded them up down at the south end of the lake, and they took them all the way up to the north end of the lake, set them up across from the island, and started shooting. What was it called? It was called, it wasn't grape shot. It was a type of cannonball that when it exploded, it sends out lots of shrapnel and kills everybody. They started shooting those, but the cannons were too short. The range was too short. And so the tribe was out on the beach, you know, saying, man, yeah, you know, you can't get us. Meanwhile, the military with these two boats put a bunch of guys in the boats with rifles and came around to the other side of the island. And while they were being distracted by the cannons, they got out of the boats, hit the island, and slaughtered as many people as they could. We've got handed down accounts, grandparents, great grandparents handed down accounts of babies being bayoneted and held up on the bayonet and tossed into the lake. You know, mothers, and you know, it was horrendous. You know, it really was. But yeah, and they weren't even related to the Kelseyville tribe that murdered Stone and Kelsey. And then the military was not satisfied there, so they went up to Potter Valley to see if there was a tribe up there. That tribe had vanished and was in hiding. So they went over to Ukiah along the Russian River, and just about 2 miles south of Ukiah, they found another village and massacred that village. And you know, those people weren't even speaking the same language as the people in Kelseyville. So yeah, it was a mess.
So based upon all of this kind of shocking, and again, you know, obviously, I'm sure our audience knows this, all of you know this, massacres like this happened throughout the Americas with colonizers, with white people coming in, stealing indigenous land, murdering, raping, torturing, etc. But as we're focusing on this specific incident, Lydia, can you tell us a little bit just about the name change? What is the proposed name change? Who is behind it, and what does that kind of entail?
Right. So I think that, there have been efforts by various people over the years to reconsider the name, right? And finally, I think over the pandemic, this group, Citizens for Healing, discovered by, research that this long process that they thought they had to go through to change the name, they thought they had to bring it to a vote by the county, I believe. It turned out the county didn't have jurisdiction over the name after all. There is a group of, actually quite a large group of natural features and also small towns that are governed by a federal body, which is called the Board of Geographical Names. And so they realized that they didn't have to go through this sort of giant public process, although they did. The Citizens for Healing group did go around did sort of do a tour around the area to, talk about this idea. So there was this process of talking to people about what was going on, right? And letting, kind of getting the word out. But right now it's in the hands of this federal group. So, and there's a whole process that's detailed there. And that the BGN has been pretty active in recent times about changing names. So we'll see, right? But,
What is the proposed name change?
it's Konocti, to name it after the mountain. Yeah.
I know Konocti just from like Konocti Harbor Inn.
Right. Yeah. They used to have really good, music festivals there.
Yeah. It'd be like, air supply at Konocti Harbor Inn. All right.
Yeah.
So where do you mind my asking, John, where you stand on this name change as a resident of what is now called Kelseyville?
Personally, it's not, personally, I'm not really involved. Because I've worked with the Native Americans around Lake County for more than 50 years, I understand the feeling that's there, and yeah, to me, I would be crazy if somebody like that had a town named after them in my area where I had been living for 14,000 years. I'd be a little pissed off. Yeah, I'd want to see that change. I personally don't care one way or the other. I'll have to change my business cards. I'm sure there's a lot of expense in name change stuff like that. But I think where we are now nationwide, I think it's a good idea because it makes everything more inclusive. We're more inclusive now of all cultures and races and everything. I mean, if you think about it, we're a nation of immigrants. We are all immigrants here, except for the Pomo people that are living around the lake today. And I think it's overdue, but it's not my culture, so it's not my thing. Whatever.
I will now. So Lydia, I mentioned before we went live that we received some letters to the editor in response to your article. And we've done name change stories at Alta before, namely Sir Francis Drake Boulevard here in Marin, Uniborough Sarah. There's been movements to remove his names from things, certain statues, certainly around California. I'm curious how you respond to, I realize you're a journalist, and so what is it for you to respond to criticism? But the argument, I guess, against, why don't I come from that? The argument against a name change is, is it denying history? Or are we denying history? Does it create added taxpayer expense? Is it enforcing a 21st century culture upon people who lived hundreds of years ago? What do you kind of make of those arguments? And is there a barometer for really particularly horrendous behavior versus wonderful leaders who made horrible mistakes? I'm not saying Andrew Kelsey is one of those people. He sounds like a murderous, rapist, horrible. I mean, but there, people have wanted to change Lincoln's name off of things. Do you feel that there are degrees of that, and where does this fit in?
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at the context, the greater context of how bad it was for the Native Americans here in California, and I don't think I certainly wasn't cognizant of how bad it was until I got into this story. But apparently there were something like, and John, you can correct me on this, but I think there were something like 300,000 Native Americans living in California before the Spanish arrived. And then like within 100 years, we were down to like what, 30,000? I mean, that is catastrophic, right? And
Yeah.
so, if you're not someone who just brought diseases, and sort of benign neglect kind of harm, but if you're actively involved in killing people, I mean, I think that's a pretty clear line to say like, hey, this is not okay, right? So again, I realize, like I've lived in my town for a long time. And so I empathize with the people who are saying, hey, this Kelseyville means a lot to me, not because of Andrew Kelsey, obviously, but for all the time that I've lived in this community and, all the good things that are part of this community that have nothing to do with Andrew Kelsey and Charles, is it Charles Stone?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, with those two guys, and life, the period where Kelseyville is an active name is way past, I'm past that era of when all these horrible things happen. But I think, we need to think about what that name means to everyone. And if some people have decidedly not neutral feelings about the name, right? Like, would you want your neighbors, like, how do we need to think about how our neighbors feel about things too, right? So I don't know. I mean,
Done.
again, having the name of your town being taken away from local control is obviously a whole issue itself. And so, it's very important for for people and communities to have a sense of agency. So I also sympathize with that aspect. But yeah, I mean, I think this is maybe where we do need to think a little bit about the greater implications of that name.
Sean, what do you think?
I think the Native American community in Lake County has made incredible advances culturally and politically in the past 10 years. And I think that's part of where this is coming from. When I first moved here, the discrimination was rampant and it was obvious. And they were, they were the lowest of the low in the cultural level, whatever you want to call it. But we've got a Native American on the board of supervisors now. We've got Native American planning commissioners in the county, and there's 4 different tribal reservations. There's 4 or 5 casinos that are going on, and they're contributing to the overall county economy. And it's a totally different community now than it was 30 years ago. And very proactive and very supportive of the local communities and everything. So it's I think that's why this is happening now and didn't happen 30 years ago. And also I think we have new people moving into the county from population centers like the Bay Area, San Francisco area, and that sort of thing. Those people have a kind of a more liberal view of the world than the old families that have been here for 150 years, the old rancher families and that sort of thing. Those are the families that really don't want to see the change. The people that are moving in from the more liberal areas of California, I think, are more open to that sort of thing. So I think that's why it's happening now. Where it's going to go, I have no idea. It's who knows.
Is there a timeline for that? Is there a ballpark of when a name change might be approved or denied?
I have to refer you to the Board of Geographical Names for that information. They do have a website that has the procedure. Like,
I think we have a link to it in your article. Folks, we will send everyone that.
but again, it's not every place that it, if you're, most towns and cities will not be under this jurisdiction of this organization. So
Right, this is just because it's unincorporated.
I think even beyond that, it's like, yeah, it falls specifically. I don't know who decided what gets to be contained in this group of, landmarks, geographical features, and these tiny, sparsely populated places.
It's an interesting case in that, and I swear out of time. I mean, thank you both so much for being here. It's such an interesting case in terms of the kind of specificity of what happened here that was so particularly violent, and kind of the circumstances around who's in charge of the name change, who's behind the desire for the name change, and the significance of the land in terms of North American history, of human history in North America. It's really a fascinating kind of case study. And I hope, Lydia, you and John will kind of keep us in the loop as to what happens moving forward. So thank you both very much for joining us today.
All right. Thank you, Ben.
Folks, before you leave, I want to invite you next week. We are going to be joined by Marcus Crowder, who did kind of a fascinating story on what is going on, the drama behind the Oregon Shakespeare Festival up in Ashland, Oregon. There's been a lot of changes afoot behind the scenes in terms of the leadership, and how that is reflecting changes in the world, changes in theater, with this long-standing theatrical organization. So join us for that event. That is Wednesday, May 8th at 12:30. Again, Dr. John Parker, Lydia Lee, thank you both for joining us. And folks, we'll see you next time. Take care.